Hello, and welcome back to more Films That Are Constant Critique, where we take a look at films, some good, some bad, and some downright awful. I'm Bongo Baikov, joined by our host, Maverick Dren Zaria. This week we are taking a look at the film Dr. No.
I think what you were supposed to say was Baikov. Bongo Baikov.
Oh, that's
and
right.
Dren Zaria.
Actually...
Maverick Dren Zaria.
And I guess this would be just like a detail that's more relevant for the GoldenEye episode we're going to do in the future. But that part of my name, Baikov, comes from... Actually, my full... I'm going to start this part over. my full username, Bongo Baikov, actually comes from the GoldenEye video game from 2010. My online tag was Bongo, and the character that I played was named Baikov.
Okay.
So that whole thing just comes from James Bond, technically.
Yeah, since you messed up the names, I might have to send Odd Job or Jaws to kill you later. But yeah, well, from now on, whenever we do a James Bond episode, maybe we should do the introduction, like, you know.
Baikov, Bongo Baikov.
And Dren Zaria, Maverick Dren Zaria, but anyway.
Maverick Dren Zaria.
I feel like we've already done some of these on the podcast. I mean, because we talk about these damn movies so much, you know, I mean.
Yeah.
And for those listening, you're probably wondering why it took us so long to get around to these. Look.
Good question.
Look, there's a lot of James Bond movies. Where do we start? And then your idea was do the first movie for each Bond actor. And I was like, okay, that's an interesting way to start. And it'll change things up a bit.
Yeah.
Because my original idea was to do either all of Lazenby's movies, which is very daunting, obviously. Or all of Dalton's movies. But no, okay, we are starting with the first theatrical James Bond film, Dr. No. I have to add in that clarifier because there was a TV series, an anthology TV series that adapted Casino Royale in the 50s. So it's not the first adaptation of James Bond, but is the first theatrical adaptation of James Bond.
And the first done by Eon Productions, who would go on to make most of the James Bond movies from
Yes. It came out October 5th, 1962 in the United Kingdom. And then in the US on May 8th, 1963. That makes it the second oldest movie we've done on the podcast.
Ooh.
The only one older than that is Thing from Another World, which was from 1951.
Okay.
So it's kind of nice that we're doing movies from like the 60s and 70s here, you know.
Yeah, finally going back and doing some more of the older ones.
The budget of this was $1.1 million, and it made $59.5 million, so it made...
That's a pretty good return.
It made bank. It was produced by Albert R. Broccoli, or Cubby Broccoli, as he was known by friends, and Harry Saltzman. I just love those names. Those names are great, you know. Broccoli and Saltzman. So, like I mentioned before, there was another James Bond adaptation before this, a TV adaptation of Casino Royale for the anthology series Climax from 1954. It starred Barry Nelson, who played Stuart Ullman in The Shining.
Oh, okay.
The guy that, like, Jack goes to see in The Office when he's, like, getting a task of, like, you know, getting a hotel. And in the TV In that TV adaptation, he plays Jimmy Bond.
Close enough.
Yes, an American James Bond, and Peter Lorre played Le Chiffre.
Okay.
Peter Lorre was definitely the highlight of that, because it was not a good adaptation. And we'll probably talk about like the rights issues with Casino Royale later because of this, but that Eon Productions, they basically got the rights to all the other books besides Casino Royale, and the first one they decided to adapt was the 6th book, Dr. No, for some reason. So the first theatrical movie wasn't the first book, it was the 6th book.
So the first book was Casino Royale. What came in between those?
The second book was Live and Let Die. The third book was Diamonds Are Forever. The fourth book was From Russia with Love. Wait. So Diamonds Are Forever was Moonraker was the third book. That's right.
Wow, these are just they were adapted all over the place, huh?
Let me redo this. Okay, the first book was Casino Royale. Live and Let Die was the second book. Moonraker was third. Diamonds Are Forever was fourth. Fifth was From Russia with Love. Sixth was Dr. No. Okay.
So yeah, they adapted those all out of order.
Yeah. So they decided, okay, we'll adapt the 6th book. This movie does follow the book in a lot of ways. There are some differences. It's been a couple years since I've read it, so if I'm a bit rusty here on some of the details, sorry about that. In the book, Dr. No tries killing Bond with a centipede instead of a tarantula.
Huh.
There's also a fight with a squid towards the end of the book.
Huh.
So I guess they were trying to pay homage to my favorite book, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea there. Dr. No is bald and 9 feet tall in the book.
9 feet tall?
Yeah.
These books sound insane.
And he works for the USSR instead of Spectre.
Huh.
You said these books sound insane. Wait till I tell you how he dies in the book. The way Dr. No gets killed in the book is honestly pretty dumb. He gets covered in guano.
What? So what was his plan in the book? Was it like the same as it is in this, or?
I think it was kind of just the same thing, if I remember right.
Okay.
It takes place in Jamaica, like in the, like the movie. Miss Taro, Felix Leiter, and Professor Dent are not in the book.
Interesting. Huh.
Felix Leiter is in some of the other James Bond books, which I'll talk about that later, probably. When Bond first meets Honey Rider, she is naked. Which is a bit different from the movie.
A little bit different.
A little bit different. So there are quite a few changes, but you can kind of you could tell it's the same thing for the most part.
Yeah.
Of the Connery movies, I would say this is probably the one that feels the most like the Fleming books. Either this or From Russia with Love. Those two are actually pretty accurate to the books, and like even Goldfinger actually has some things that are accurate, but a lot of the plot got changed around. But I'll talk about that whenever we get around to doing Goldfinger. The thing that sets Connery apart from the book character of James Bond is there's a lot more humor and Connery is a very charismatic man, which is not the Bond of the books.
Really? I always assumed that he would be like a suave guy in the books too.
Bond in the books is very serious. Ian Fleming's original
Huh.
goal was for Bond to be a boring character, a blunt instrument, as he described him, that had interesting things happen to him. He even picked the name James Bond because he saw the name of an ornithologist and said, "By God, that's got to be the dullest name I ever heard." Because, yeah, James Bond isn't exactly the most exciting name on the planet when you really strip it of its, like,
Yeah.
iconography.
Of like, yeah.
Bond didn't really get a sense of humor until the later books of the series, and that might have been because some of those were written after the movies, so, you know.
So then it kind of just adapted his personality from the movies.
Yeah. Which is, some people also think that's why Ian Fleming gave Bond Scottish ancestry in some of the later books.
Oh, just to match more with Sean Connery.
Sean Connery, yeah. Aside from a few changes, I would say the first 4 Connery movies are pretty accurate plot-wise to the books, especially the first 2 movies. Oh, another thing, the books are very much not PG. It is obvious.
I kind of figured if this is the movie that they were able to do in '62, I figured the book was probably a bit more risque.
If they were adapted exactly, they would get R ratings for sure. And the books are also a lot more racist and sexist than the movies.
Hearing that they're more racist is a bit wild, but not too surprising.
Basically, anyone that isn't like a white, straight British dude is not depicted well in the books. But
yeah, that somehow that doesn't surprise me.
In fact, there was like a bit of controversy like a few years ago. They were trying to like release versions that removed some of the
oh yeah,
worse bits, and like some people didn't like that. They thought it was censorship. But I mean, they were written in the 50s and 60s, so like, is that really that surprising? That
yeah, yeah. I don't know that. I'm just thinking like with You Only Live Twice, they have Sean Connery. They try to put him in makeup to make him look more Japanese, which is wild. But
yeah, that was, oh my god. And would you believe it? The books are even anyway. But getting back to the movie, but I would say, I guess if I was going to give my thoughts on Dr. No, the book, it was okay. I don't think it was one of the better James Bond books, from what I remember of it. Like, it was fine, but there are some that are really good though, and I'll probably talk about those later when we get to them. So the movie, Dr. No, getting back to that, was directed by Terence Young, who directed 2 other Bond movies. He directed From Russia with Love and Thunderball.
okay.
So not that surprising that he also did some of the other Connery ones. He also directed Inchon. Which is,
I see.
if anyone knows about that movie, I still don't think it has like a DVD or Blu-ray release, last I heard, because it was so bad. But hey, you get to see Lawrence, and Laurence Olivier plays General Douglas MacArthur. It's not a good movie.
Something else interesting about Terence Young is he directed a movie called No Time to Die.
That's right. Yes, maybe we should do that on the podcast just to confuse people.
No Time to Die versus No Time to Die.
Oh, Jesus.
Just two movies that have nothing to do with each other.
We could probably find a bunch of other ones, yeah. I think there was another movie called, like, GoldenEye or something. Like, it might have been a Charlie Chan movie, actually, now that I think about it. But anyway. So, Dr. No was written by Richard Maybaum, or Maybaum. I'm not sure how to pronounce that exactly. Get used to that name.
I'm guessing that means he wrote more Bond films.
Yeah. Yeah, you could say that. Joanna Harwood more? And Berkeley Mather, don't get used to those two names. And the cast. Okay, here we go. We, of course, have Sean Connery.
Yep.
One of my favorite
cast member.
Yep. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Highlander, and he's in a bunch of other stuff. But now we finally do his most famous role, which is, oh shit, I can't remember. I was gonna say his character name from Hunt for October, but I don't remember what his name was.
Oh, you just forgot.
Rabius? Like Commander Rabius?
Yeah, Marco Ramius. Commanding officer of the Red October.
But yeah, I think people know who Sean Connery is. You ever hear of James Bond? He kind of got the whole thing rolling with James Bond. Anyway. Ursula Andress, which she also appears in the 1967 spoof version of Casino Royale.
Really? Does she play Vesper in that one, or...?
Shoot, I don't remember. I'm trying to remember.
Oh, she does. I just looked it up. She does.
But the reason I don't remember is because that movie has very little to do with that story at all.
That's fair.
But, I mean, she's in an actual James Bond movie and a parody version of James Bond, so there's that.
As a Bond girl in both.
Yep. Joseph Wiseman, he's the main villain in this one. He was also in Viva Zapata with Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando plays a Mexican.
Oh boy.
The Silver Chalice, which was Paul Newman's film debut, that he was embarrassed by. And he's also in Buck Rogers in the 25th Century.
Oh. Huh.
I don't remember who he plays in any of these, but okay. Jack Lord, which you might know him if you're familiar with Hawaii Five-0.
Huh.
I haven't seen the show, but
who did?
I know the theme song. He's the one that says "Book 'em, Nano."
Okay.
And he plays Felix Leiter in this. The first Felix Leiter was played by the guy from Hawaii Five-0, of course. Bernard Lee, which we're going to be hearing his name a lot, and we're actually recording this on his birthday today.
Oh, really? Huh.
And aside from playing M in 11 James Bond movies...
Oh. That's a lot of Bond movies.
He's also in The Third Man, which is a film noir, Joseph Cotton and Orson Welles. Really, really good movie if you haven't seen it. He's in the Bond ripoff OK Connery, aka Operation Kid Brother, which starred Sean Connery's brother, Neil Connery.
What is this? What is this?
It's
an Italian movie. It makes sense now.
You've never heard of this?
I understand. I've never heard of this.
It's awful. Grant, the only reason I've heard of it is because it was on Mystery Science Theater.
Oh, okay.
And needless to say, Neil Connery Not as good as Sean Connery, although probably guessed that.
I'm looking at his filmography on Wikipedia, and it's 2 movies.
What was the other one?
The Body Stealers.
Oh shit, I might have seen that actually. That sounds familiar. Wait, have I seen that? That poster looks familiar. I might have seen that.
Oh no, have you seen all of the Neil Connery
yes,
movies?
I've seen it. Oh my god. And I gave it a higher rating than Operation Kid Brother, I guess. So there's that. To be fair, that is a very memorable poster for both of those movies. Both of those movies actually have pretty good posters. Bernard Lee was also in Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, which was the last Hammer Frankenstein movie with Peter Cushing.
Huh.
So there's that. Lois Maxwell, which you'll get used to hearing her name a lot as well, because she plays Moneypenny.
Oh yeah, so how many is she in?
Oh jeez, more than Bernard Lee, because she was around longer than he
14! 14 movies!
She's around for the entire Connery run, Lazenby's film, and I think the entire Roger Moore run. I think she's in she's in the first 14 James Bond movies. M was absent from a few of them. Q was absent from a few of them. So wow, she really stuck it out. Okay. Anthony Dawson, which this is not his last time appearing in Bond movies because he plays Blofeld in From Russia with Love and Goldfinger. Or sorry, not Goldfinger, Thunderball. Why did I write Goldfinger? Spectre is... Let me... He's in From Russia with Love and Thunderball, which... That makes him one of the few actors to play that character more than once. Although you don't see his face, and his voice is dubbed over, so, wouldn't be able to recognize him, but... And he's the guy that he plays Professor Dent in Dr. No, so...
Okay. He was the geologist, right?
Yes. And we'll talk about that scene with him and Bond eventually. The music was done by Monty Norman, which is very unusual for this series, because usually John Barry did the music. Although John Barry did help arrange the main theme, so he did contribute some to this movie. And John Barry also did Star Crash. And some of his tracks from the Black Hole were used in Turkish Star Wars, so he's been on the podcast a few times in that case. Okay, so initial thoughts. Well, I've been talking a while. You know what? I'll let you go first on this one. I've been talking too fucking long.
So this is, I think, the 4th time I've seen this movie.
4th?
I think so.
Wait. Yeah. 1, 2... No, I think we've seen it the same number of times, actually. But I didn't know you've seen it 4 times.
Yeah, because every time I tell myself that I'm going to watch through all the Bond movies, I go back and start with Dr. No, and then I usually burn myself out by watching 6 in a row.
Oh, yeah.
Or 3 or 4 in a row. And so then I'm like, okay. And then I come back to it 2 years later and watch it again. So this is, I think, my 4th time watching this. I had seen the Daniel Craig movies before this. I'd seen GoldenEye. I don't exactly remember, but I think I even watched at least one of the Roger Moore ones before this, maybe Octopussy. And so I'd gone in seeing a couple of different James Bond movies, And the very first time I watched it, I just remember being kind of bored by it. But I think that upon every time I rewatch it, I come out appreciating it more and actually enjoying it more. And I will say, I actually liked this movie quite a bit this time on this watch. It's definitely not as flashy or as just absolutely insane as some later Bond films, but it definitely establishes the formula. It feels a lot more grounded than some of the later films, which is a pretty interesting feeling for one of these movies.
Yeah, because they get, by the time you get to like You Only Live Twice, they're in like this big volcano lair, and there's a bunch of explosions, and it's just insane. And then the Roger Moore one, yeah, we'll talk about some of those other ones later at some point.
Yeah. But overall, I think if you're used to like the bigger, flashier, higher budget Bond films, you might go into it the same way I did and just be kind of bored. But if you watch it and you accept it for what it is, it's actually a pretty enjoyable thing. There's almost like a mystery element to it, which is pretty interesting to watch. The cast is pretty good. The music, even though there's not a ton of it, is pretty good. And of course, Connery just absolutely nails it as James Bond.
Yeah, absolutely. The did you have anything else to say with this one, or?
Those are my initial thoughts for now.
So if it isn't obvious from like comments I've made on the podcast, I really love the James Bond movies. You know, most of them at least. I would say it's one of my favorite film series. Probably either this or like Star Wars or like Indiana Jones. One of those three. And this was one of the first James Bond movies I ever watched, actually. It was not the first, but it was one of the first. The first one I ever saw was From Russia with Love.
Okay.
And then I also saw Goldfinger and part of The Man with the Golden Gun, because those two were like on TV one time. And strangely, it was Dr. No that was the movie that got me into Bond.
Huh.
For some reason, those other ones, I was kind of like, okay, you know, but then watching this one, something about this one really clicked with me when I first saw it. Maybe it was the tarantula scene or the dinner scene at the end. But this was the one where I started seeing why people love these movies so much. Or this was the one where I started seeing why the Connery ones were considered classics.
Yeah.
Like, it took a bit more time for me to appreciate some of the other ones. But then again, part of it might also be because this was one of the first ones I saw where I could actually hear what the characters were saying. Because when I saw Goldfinger the first time, it was on TV during Thanksgiving. People were like talking over it. I could barely hear any of the dialogue. Nowadays, Dr. No is one that I enjoy, but I think there's other ones that are better, like From Russia with Love and Goldfinger, for example, are the obvious ones.
Yeah.
I absolutely love those two, for example. In fact, actually, I rewatched those two anyway, even though we're not doing podcasts on them yet. Like, Goldfinger I rewatched yesterday. I kind of just want to talk about Goldfinger, honestly.
I've actually been thinking about rewatching that one because I have it on VHS, actually.
I absolutely love Goldfinger. That's like one of my favorite movies. But I do enjoy Dr. No. It does feel like a prototype of what was to come. So, like you said, it's a little less flashy. It's lower budget. He doesn't have the gadgets in this one.
Yeah.
And the stakes are a bit lower. But I think there's a lot of classic Bond moments in this one. The villain, I think, is pretty cool with his, like, metallic hands that crush things. And Sean Connery is... I know this is, like, the most unoriginal choice of all time. He's my favorite Bond. I mean... because he is James Bond. You know, I mean,
yeah.
I've liked, because I have liked most of the other actors that came after him, but I mean, come on, Sean Connery. was the James Bond, you know.
Yeah, no, it's really hard to argue against Connery being the best because
He was the
he
first,
really
for
set,
one.
yeah, and he really set the bar with his performance in these movies because like you mentioned, the Bond in the books was just a different character completely, and so every Bond after him is trying in some way to emulate what Connery brought to the
And
role.
I think the more successful Bond actors were the ones that tried to go back to the books, which would be like Dalton and Craig, for example. I think because they were trying to be a little bit more serious and kind of emulate the Fleming character, you know, but also try to do their own spin on it. Whereas like, but then also you have to struggle with the fact that like you're dealing with that Connery just did his interpretation of the character, and it was so iconic and so memorable. That was also part of it. I mean, Sean Connery is just one of my favorite actors of all time, even outside of like James Bond. He's in a lot of movies I love. I mean, we've done 2 of them on the podcast. And it's fun watching his movies too because he just gets, the older he gets, the more Scottish he gets. You know?
The accent just becomes more and more pronounced.
Yeah. But I think his performances in the first 2 movies he did are very interesting because he feels more like a human being in them, like more. Because when you get to Goldfinger, he's got this like cool, confident swagger to him. Like he just seems so relaxed.
Yeah.
Whereas in his first 2 movies, he feels a little more rough around the edges, which is kind of interesting. It kind of feels like he was being Sean Connery as Bond, but also was kind of taking some of the stuff from the book, you know, the Fleming books. And I think part of why Connery is my favorite Bond, well, aside from just being, well, the fact he's Sean Connery, I mean, I think he had the best balance between being funny and being serious. A lot of the other actors don't have that balance, you know. They're either too goofy or they're too serious. I think Connery had the best balance between that. You know, you can take him seriously in the part, but he has like one-liners every now and again that he delivers pretty well. Hey, if you want something that'll make you appreciate this movie fast, try watching some of the James Bond rip-offs that came out around that time. Like,
try watching any of the Casino Royales,
Operation Kid Brother,
besides the Craig one.
I was watching one yesterday. It was like called "Kiss the Girls and Make Them Die" or something like that. A lot of those, a lot of the rip-offs were just kind of cheap and boring. They're just not that great.
Oh, of course, Kiss the Girls and Make Them Die is an Italian film.
Yeah, a lot of them were Italian films. Okay, what do you want to guess Leonard Maltin gave this?
I'm gonna say either. I'm gonna say 3.5. 3.5.
You think he gave it 3.5?
Yep, 3.5 out of 4.
Yes.
Yeah.
He said, first James Bond film is least pretentious.
Fair.
With meaty story, fine all-around production of Ian Fleming caper. So yeah, he liked this one. Also, they're out of print, but the first 3 James Bond movies, so this one, From Russia with Love and Goldfinger, all had Laserdisc releases by the Criterion Collection. So this movie's technically in the Criterion Collection.
I wonder if I can find that on the...
They're very rare, and there's a reason why. The commentary tracks caused some controversy.
Oh, is that the one where Connery made the comment about women and slapping them? Or
No, that was like that was an interview or something. No, he's not even on the commentaries if I remember right. It's like some of the producers and like directors, they made some comments that were a bit too candid, apparently. And there's also a few homophobic slurs in there as well. So yeah,
that's not good.
This is back in the 90s too. Like in Cubby Broccoli, he did not like those commentaries, so he just had them recalled. So yeah, they're hard to find now, apparently. But some people found them, and they've like somebody put like excerpts from them up on YouTube. I listened to a few of them. And they weren't as shocking as I thought they would be, but I was like, I could sort of see why they wouldn't want that out there. Okay, so the story. Now, pay attention, 007. James Bond has to investigate some murders in Jamaica, where a mysterious villain named Dr. No lives on an island, guarded by a dragon. Some people try killing Bond, including with a tarantula.
I can't wait to talk about that scene.
Oh, and Bond bangs a bunch of women. I mean, that kind of goes without saying.
No big surprise there.
That's about as simple as I can keep the plot here, unless there's something important I left out.
He goes to an island to meet a very intelligent paraplegic.
A very intelligent paraplegic. Okay. I guess that's one way to put it. I guess that would be the explain a film plot badly.
That's the Netflix summary.
That's the Netflix. Yeah. Okay, so let's start with the pros. This took a while. The music.
Very good.
Yeah, this is the first one where the Bond theme appeared, like do do da 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 da, that do that. I'm not gonna do the whole thing,
but just a cappella the whole theme.
People know the fucking James Bond theme, okay? It's one of the most memorable movie themes of all time. And it gets you, like, do I need to talk about the Bond theme? Okay.
It's iconic for a reason. It perfectly fits the vibe of the movie. It's like just a great spy theme.
Yeah. And the guitar, I like the guitar on it. Yeah. They've been using it for like 60 years at this point, so it's like... And this is also... The gun barrel is in this one.
Yep.
It's not quite the same format as they do in the later ones, but the gun barrel, where he, shoots and there's like blood that goes down, that's in this. And
that, like you said, it's kind of like a prototype of the gun barrel scenes that we would get later.
We're introduced to the 3 blind mice.
Can we talk about just like a little bit of that intro, because it starts off with the Bond theme in the opening credits, then suddenly there's like casual bongos getting played, and then it looks like the scene from Mulholland Drive.
I think it was like calypso music or something. I don't know, but
yeah. And then suddenly we start hearing people singing 3 blind mice.
Yeah, and then that's when we see the 3 blind mice.
It's a really funny transition.
It is. It's weird, yeah. It really confused me the first time I saw it.
It still confuses me.
But they're these henchmen... Okay, so they're pretending to be blind guys with canes?
I think they are.
Or are they actually... I assume they're not actually blind.
I think they're pretending because they shoot a guy. So
they're also driving a car.
Aim.
They're also driving a car at one point.
That's also a good point. Yep, they pretend to be blind. I
like that car chase they have with Bond where he like runs them off the road and their car explodes.
They were on their way. I think they were on their way to a funeral.
Yeah, I love that line. That's so good. Yeah, they like kill a few people, and that's kind of what the movie starts off with. And then a few scenes later, we get Bond's introduction, and it's perfect. I mean, it's one of the best like character introductions like of all time. I mean, do I even need to explain it? Like,
Yeah, it's Bond playing Baccarat, like the thing that James Bond is known for.
we don't even see his face at first, and then
Yeah.
and eventually we like get the face reveal, and like his theme starts playing, and the way he says his own name. I mean, just from when he says his name, that's why Sean Connery is Bond. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think any of the other actors like delivered Bond, James Bond, you know, as well as
Quite as well as he did, exactly.
it's so smooth and so casual. Like, you, granted, it helps that Sean Connery has like one of the greatest voices ever.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and charisma that's like off the charts, you know. Because you totally buy, and from what I read about, he wasn't like, because you know we see James Bond as this like refined like gentleman character. Sean Connery was not like that before he was cast in this movie. Apparently,
Yeah.
he was this like big, just burly Scottish dude, and they had to clean him up to be in this. You know, show him like how to wear a suit and stuff. You know. But he's such a good actor that you just buy that, yeah, he's James Bond, you know.
And he's so incredibly suave. He's like flirting flawlessly with this lady that he's playing Baccarat with. And then in the very next scene, he's continuing to flirt with Moneypenny. Just someone new to us.
Is it any wonder they weren't sure if they'd even make any more after he left? I mean, it's just how do you live up to this guy? He just walks into the room and he's like the coolest dude in the room, like whenever he's there. But what's interesting, Sylvia Trench is the girl he's flirting with at the beginning. She's one of the few Bond girls to appear in more than one movie. Because she's also in From Russia with Love at the beginning.
Oh, really? I forgot about that.
He kept her around for another movie, I guess. And yeah, when he's flirting with her, that's great. And I love the part when she breaks into Bond's room and she's just playing golf in there with just a shirt on. For some reason. It's just like, okay. And then Bond says he has to leave, and immediately, and they start kissing, and he says, almost immediately. It is ridiculous how easy it is for him to just seduce the women in this. Like, it seems like just the minute they see
it's
him,
like flawless. Just the fact that he's there, they're immediately like, yes.
Just whenever he walks to the room, they see him, they're just like, they just immediately want to get in his pants.
I mentioned the scene with him and Moneypenny earlier. I forgot how hard that they flirt with each other.
I mean, he is Sean Connery. I'd do the same if I were in their position. But yeah, whenever Moneypenny, I that's another thing I love about the early Connery ones. Is like whenever he's flirting with Moneypenny, because it's kind of this back and forth, will they, won't they kind of thing.
And Moneypenny is able to keep up with him. She has a pretty sharp wit too, which is pretty fun. That it's not just a one-sided swoon fest.
Yeah. And we'll get to this later, but she's very sad when Bond gets married in one of the later movies. And I didn't realize this until recently, but Connery, I knew he wore a toupee in some of the movies, but I didn't realize he was wearing them from the beginning, actually.
Oh, was he wearing it in this one?
I didn't realize it, like, I thought that was, like, some of the later ones, because in some of the later ones he's in, it's, like, Diamonds Are Forever, it's kind of obvious he's wearing a toupee, and, like, Never Seen Ever Again. But apparently, no, he was wearing one from the beginning, which surprised me. I guess it's kind of obvious when you get to Goldfinger, his hair color is a little bit lighter than in his first two movies, but I just, for some reason, I just never noticed it that early. You know, I didn't think it became noticeable until like You Only Live Twice, but anyway.
Yeah.
And I love whenever Bond is interrogating people in these, because Connery just, whenever he just gets an excuse to like roughhouse somebody in this movie, it's always fun.
Yeah, yeah.
He's a lot angrier in this movie, in particular. I noticed compared to his other
So
ones.
it's not just anger. He has a few other interesting character quirks in this one. Like in the scene where Q comes to give Bond the Walter PPK, Bond's like trying to fight to keep his Beretta the whole time, which feels a bit weird.
Yeah, the scenes with him and M are fun because M and Q they just treat him like he's a little kid that's misbehaving, which is funny.
Pretty much, because they threaten to put him on like regular like intelligence duty.
That gets even more amplified once you get to like the Roger Moore ones, because Roger Moore just acts so childish in those, and Q just does not like putting up with his shit.
I remember Q straight up tells the Roger Moore Bond to grow up at one point.
Yeah, that does have. I think that was an Octopussy, if I remember right. Yeah,
I think so.
I
Yeah.
think that was the one. But yeah, although technically Q's not. Well, he kind of is, but it. Okay, he's not played by Desmond Llewellyn in this one. He's played by a different guy, and he's called Major Boothroyd in this one instead of Q.
Huh.
So technically, Q, as we know him, doesn't appear until From Russia with Love. Actually, but maybe I'll talk about that later. But it was just kind of funny watching this one because in Goldfinger, Connery just seems so relaxed the whole time, whereas here, this one, it just seemed like he was more pissed off and the whole time, which I guess it's because in his first two movies they were trying to make him more of just a normal human being rather than just smooth, cool super spy like he gets in some of his later ones. And Connery also has a really nice singing voice, as we find out in this one. Because there's that part where he first sees Honey Rider on the beach and she's singing underneath the mango tree. He starts singing back to her. And oh god, that scene's great. That's
a lot of James's interactions with Honey in this are just fantastic.
But that first scene, there's one line in there that I love, like, because she's just there to like look, collecting like shells and stuff. She's wearing a bikini. And she says, "What are you doing here? Looking for shells?" And then Bond says, "No, I'm just looking." Oh god, that's great. I love that. I love that.
This is jumping ahead a little bit.
I'm kind of jumping ahead.
Yeah, but just their relationship throughout the movie is really funny. There's one moment where she's telling him about how she got abused by like a landlord after her father died. And she's like, I put a black widow spider into his bed and watched him slowly die afterwards. And Bond looks genuinely a little like disturbed by it. And his response is, "Don't make it a habit."
Don't make it a yeah. Yeah, the fact that even like Bond is like disturbed by that. Because remember, this is James Bond, License to Kill. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, she's interesting because she just, I guess, she just goes there, collects seashells. She at one point says she thinks Dr. No killed her dad. Which I don't know about that. And I mean, it's a famous shot, like it seems like every James Bond parody, they're always parodying that shot of her like coming out of the ocean.
Of her coming out of the sea.
It's in like one of the Austin Powers movies. It's been parodied twice in 2 other James Bond movies, one of which we'll get to eventually in the near future. But yeah, that story of her with the spider was interesting, and if I remember right, that story is in the book.
Okay.
And speaking of spiders, should we talk about that other scene?
Okay, we should.
So when I first saw this movie, this was one of the scenes that stuck out to me because it is memorable, albeit
maybe
completely.
maybe not for the right reasons.
It's not realistic though, because what happens is James Bond is like sleeping. Dr. No gave Professor Dent like a tarantula to put in his bed, and it's like crawling on him. So they're trying to kill James Bond with a tarantula, which most tarantulas aren't lethal to humans, so
Yeah.
that's pretty absurd. And if you look closely, you could tell that the spider is like crawling on glass during some parts.
Yeah. And Bond looks absolutely petrified as this thing is climbing on him. It's really funny.
Yeah. I don't remember if it actually crawled on Sean Connery or if they used a stunt double, but
And just another funny detail in that scene, when he eventually like gets it off of him and he starts like whacking it to death, with like a newspaper. The music sting is in sync with every time he hits it.
it's pretty funny. Yeah, the music in that is just it's so over the top. Yeah, but I mean, it's like it's one of those scenes from like that. This is part of why I like the James Bond movies is because they could just be normal action movies, but they just add weird stuff in there like that make them more memorable.
And this kind of gets into a different part that I wanted to talk about. But Doctor No as the villain, if we're fine to move on to him.
Very good villain, by the way.
Yes, fantastic.
He's not in the movie that much, but he does have a presence. I mean, the first time
he leaves an impression.
The first scene, I mean, the name is pretty memorable for one. And the first scene where we don't see him, but you hear his voice. It's where Professor Dent goes to meet him, and he like gives him the spider. It's in this weird, like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's this weird, like, set that looks like a cage almost, or like a I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it's another reason I like the James Bond movies, some of the older ones especially, is like the weird set design in some of them.
Yeah, no, they get really, especially like in the later ones, like You Only Live Twice, the whole volcano.
Yeah. Or like The Spy Who Loved Me, that's some good set design. Some of the Roger Moore ones have good set design. And where do I have this written?
But Dr. No, he comes across as both.
You don't see him, but you just hear his voice during that scene. He has a really creepy voice in that scene.
Yeah. He comes off as actually both really menacing and really intelligent.
Yeah. And then later when we finally do see him, I love that dinner scene with him and Bond.
Yes, it is so good because it's basically him and Bond trading wits because they're both pretty intelligent, but they're intelligent in different ways, and it really kind of shows through there. It's all really well written too.
My notes. I'm so lost right now. Sorry. Okay.
I know we're jumping around quite a bit.
But that's another thing I love about the James Bond movies is when the villain invites Bond to dinner.
Yeah.
That's always fun. Like, and this is one of my favorite dinner scenes because I love that Dr. No is disappointed by Bond.
Yeah.
He had these like really high expectations of who James Bond is, and then he just has him there and he just calls him a stupid policeman. Which almost feels like something Hans Gruber would say.
Yeah.
And then Bond is just making all these like snarky comments about him. He just seems so unimpressed with Dr. No, because Dr. No, he wanted to recruit Bond to be in Spectre. So this is the first time Spectre's mentioned in the movies.
Yeah. And I love that line when he responds to Dr. No's offer. It's like, I'm flattered. I prefer the revenge department. Of course, my first job would be finding the man who killed Strangeways and Quarrel.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great line. Because Spectre, it's an acronym. It stands for Special Executive Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, Extortion. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And they technically don't appear until From Russia with Love in the movies. And in the books, they don't appear until Thunderball. So, which is interesting. And I love, some of the lines here are just great. Like, they're like, his lair is hundreds of feet beneath the ocean, so Dr. No has this window with an aquarium.
And you just see these, like, magnified fish outside.
Yeah, which is pretty cool. And then Bond, like, says, minnows pretending they're whales, just like you on this island, Dr. No. We're not good at imitating Sean Connery in this. Or later when Dr. No is talking about his plan, he's like, world domination. Bond is saying this, sorry. Bond, like, says, world domination, same old dream. Our asylums are full of people who believe they're Napoleon or God. He's just so... I love how in the Connery ones, the villains just seem... When they actually sit down and talk to Bond, they're so irritated by him, especially in Goldfinger. Yeah. That's part of why I love Goldfinger so much, because Goldfinger, the whole time, it just feels like Bond is just
pestering him nonstop.
Pestering Goldfinger. Like, that golf scene is hilarious. Or the cards. The scene with the car, when he's cheating at cards. I want to talk about Goldfinger. I'm sorry. I love that movie so much. But there's some good ones in this, too, which are funny.
And even Dr. No and Bond's fight at the end, like, you can see Dr. No putting in all his force and just swinging his mechanical arms at Bond, just trying to stop him.
He's got these, like, metallic hands that, like, crush things, and, like, I think he said he got them because he lost them while doing radiation experiments or something.
I think so.
I think is what happened. But yeah, that's another fun thing about the Bond movies is, like, villains with, like, weird, like,
just some weird detail on him. Like, Scaramanga has 3 nipples.
Jaws has, like, the metal teeth. Odd Job has, like, a hat with a...
That's razor sharp.
It's razor sharp, yeah.
Le Chiffre cries blood.
He cries blood, yeah. There's always just some weird, like... I guess it's kind of ableist, but,
it's a little bit.
In some ways. But that's another thing I like about, especially with, like, the older James Bond movies, was... They felt like sci-fi movies at times because they just have all this weird technology in them. Especially with, like, the lair in this one. I like the look of Dr. No's lair in this.
Yeah, especially, like, when they're in their, like, control center.
Yeah.
I wrote down at that part, the set reminded me a little bit of Inframan.
Kind of, yeah. I was also thinking of... Because it was the same guy that did the production design for Dr. Strangelove. Because I think I read this somewhere. Stanley Kubrick saw Dr. No and then hired Ken Adam to do the set design for Dr. Strangelove. And there's... While watching, like, the Connery Bond movies, I can see some overlap with,
Yeah.
Dr. Strangelove. And then, the part where Bond, like, steals the radiation suit and turns the nuclear reactor up, and then Dr. No, like, dies from boiling
Just
water because
basically boiling alive.
he can't
Which
climb
is
up
pretty
because of his
brutal.
hands. The costumes are pretty fun, too. You know, I like the radiation
Yeah.
suits and the...
Because it's got this interesting helmet design where it's still, like, completely see-through.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But it has, like, this really, like, unique profile and shape to it. It's...
So, again, you can kind of see, like, the ingredients of, like, the later Bond movies here at the end. Like, the end is definitely the most memorable stuff in the movie, because that's where everything just goes ape shit, you know?
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fun.
Also, and
Also,
something that's...
Another thing I was gonna add, there's a part where Bond walks by a painting in Dr. No's lair and does a double take.
Oh, isn't it like it was a stolen painting in real life was the bit? Yeah.
In real life, that painting had been stolen around that time, so they kind of had that as a little Easter egg. Like, Dr. No apparently stole the painting, which is pretty funny. There's a lot
I will
of
say
other... I'm trying to think of what... Okay, where... Because my notes... I'm sorry, my notes...
So one more thing on Dr. No. Sadly, there is a bit of his character that got assassinated with Austin Powers coming out. Because Dr. No has this line in this where he's talking about his parents that got sort of parodied.
Right,
in Austin Powers.
Right.
So every time I hear it, I just think of Dr. Evil.
Because I noticed that when Dr. Evil was like...
My father was a relentlessly self-improving lingerie owner from Belgium with low-grade narcolepsy and a penchant for buggery.
Yeah, which is a really funny scene in that movie, to be fair.
Yeah.
I did notice that whenever I watch this one or You Only Live Twice, like, those are the two where I notice the most Austin Powers overlap.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, especially with like the lair in this one really does just look like, you know, Dr. Evil's lair, or like the one from You Only Live Twice, you know, with the volcano. It's just kind of funny, yeah. Like, the whole ending of the movie, I was like, this is, I mean, Austin Powers, you know, which obviously done on purpose, obviously. A lot of Bond's kills in this are fun, too. Like, I like the when he, like, well, I guess he didn't, okay, he didn't kill, that first guy he didn't kill, but...
Yeah, he just, like, knocked him unconscious and stole the car.
Actually, I found this detail kind of interesting. Like, some of the henchmen in this, they were... Like, there was one guy, he like, takes a suicide capsule before Bond can get any information out of him. I found that very interesting. It's like, he'd rather kill himself than, you know, tell him anything about Dr. No, which, like, how fucking evil is this Dr. No dude? Like...
Yeah. And they keep trying to assassinate Bond, and he's able to figure him out pretty quick. Like, at one point, they give him a cigarette that's been laced with cyanide that he just kind of knows he shouldn't smoke.
Yeah. The part when Professor Dent tries killing him is pretty fun too, because that's one of Connery's moments that really feels like something to be in the books, because he's so cold-blooded in that scene.
It's really cold, and it's a really hard line that he gives.
He hides behind the door and he's like playing cards until Dent shows up, and Dent like shoots the bed because Bond put some pillows there to make it look like he was sleeping. Then he just... Bond interrogates him. Dent tries shooting him, but he's out of bullets. And then Bond says, "That's a Smith & Wesson.
Smith &
Wesson.
You've had your 6. You've had your 6.
And he kills him, yeah. That's a great line.
It's such a good line.
I don't remember if it was
there's
in
another
the book
person
or not.
that tries to kill Bond, and she has, like, poison fingernail polish on.
Oh, was she the one that
Because it was her bungalow that he was in. Like, he calls the taxi for
Miss
just to
Taro,
get her
right?
out of there. Yeah, 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 yeah.
That's right. Or there's that one part with when he's with Quarrel and we haven't talked about Quarrel yet. He's kind of a fun character that they threw in.
Yeah, yeah.
In this, I like the part where there's that photographer that keeps like taking pictures of Bond, and they bring her over. She like tries scratching Quarrel in the face with a broken spoon, and he like bleeds, and Quarrel just like smiles and like laughs it off like it was nothing.
Yeah.
Which is a great moment there. I also like when Bond drives the car back to the hotel with a dead guy in the car. He tells a valet to make sure he doesn't get away.
And we already mentioned the three blind mice, three blind guys that were driving the hearse around that flew off a cliff and exploded.
Yeah, it's just that car chase is ridiculous. It's like, that's another thing about like the early James Bond movies is you could tell the rear screen projection. You know, they're not actually driving these cars. Like,
yeah, it's honestly kind of bad in this one. Like the hearse behind him looks gigantic. It looks like 2 or 3 times the size of his car. Like it's just a monster truck chasing him.
well, there are some interesting things they did with Bond in this too. Like he kind of feels more like. I guess Dr. No wasn't entirely inaccurate when he called him a stupid policeman, because he feels more like a detective in this one than in some of the other ones. Like, there's this really cool scene where it doesn't really come back later, but there's this part where he's, like, setting up his room so that he'll know somebody broke in. Like, he puts a hair over a door.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought that's actually pretty clever. Like, he feels more like...
Yeah.
an actual spy in this one as opposed to some of the later movies, you know.
And like he figures out like when the one guy comes to pick him up at the beginning of the movie in the car, he immediately knows. He's like, I made sure to specifically request that they didn't send this just to avoid this kind of situation.
Yeah, they do a good job making Bond like really clever in this one, which I like.
Yeah.
You know? And also what's interesting about the early Connery ones is that, you know, he feels more like a human being in these. Like, he gets beat up pretty bad in some of them. Like, a good example is when he's crawling through that tunnel. He gets so dirty during that scene, and his shirt is just so ripped up. Like, while watching that, it almost was reminding me of, like, Die Hard or something.
Yeah.
When, like, John McClane's, like traveling through the vents, you know?
Something else that I hadn't really thought about, it's not really a pro or con, just an interesting detail that I noticed. So Dr. No's plot in this is he's basically trying to mess with, like, the United States space program. And they're specifically mentioning that he is trying to mess with the Cape Canaveral rockets. So it sounds like he's trying to stop them from going to the moon. And that just reminded me that this movie came out years before we went to the moon. It's just a weird detail.
Yeah, because... And also years before James Bond went to the moon.
Exactly.
Because this is 1962, you know, the moon landing happened in 1969.
Yeah.
And then You Only Live Twice was the first James Bond movie where there were like people up in space, you know, if I remember right, where you actually see them up in space anyway.
Yeah.
And James Bond almost goes to space before Blofeld catches him. And then Moonraker, he actually does go to space, which Moonraker is... Oh my god, that movie.
Moonraker is unique.
I don't think you've seen it, but from what you've heard about it, it's like...
I've heard things. I've seen, like, clips, and I have no idea what is happening.
It's the most outlandish out of all the Bond movies. It's gotta be. It's so ridiculous. And I also like that Dr. No, he just lives on his own little Jamaican island, guarded by a dragon. Which is this... what the hell was that?
It's a really weird... It's hard to describe. It's strange.
The locals are, like, really superstitious, so they think there's actually a dragon there, including Honey Rider. She thinks there's a dragon there. But it's this...
And it's pretty much just like a tank with a flamethrower.
Which kills Quarrel. Poor Quarrel. But I kind of like that idea of how Dr. No he decided to scare the locals away by pretending there was a dragon on the island.
Yeah.
Just to add
I will say,
add a little mythology to the thing. And yeah, this is...
Dr. No has some really interesting wrinkles in his plans, because, like, alright, I'm gonna trick all the locals by making them think there's a dragon here. Alright, you're gonna assassinate James Bond using a tarantula.
Well, you can't wheel an entire dragon into James Bond's room.
But it's just weird. Like, why would he start a rumor that there's a dragon on the island? That's such a weirdly specific thing to do, just like the tarantula.
I don't know. Because Bond villains are fucking weird, man. That's the only thing. Have you seen some of them? I mean, they're clearly not right up there in the head. I mean, there's one that wants to, like, wipe out all the humans, like, above water in, like, a nuclear war while he's just living under the sea or something. But anyway. I do like... Another thing that's fun about the James Bond movies is that they film in exotic locales, and I like the Jamaican setting of this one. That's fun.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it feels like Bond is just on vacation and
most of it.
That's probably why they make these movies, is just because they want an excuse to,
to go film somewhere exotic for a while.
Yeah, so they're like, Jamaica, which is where it's set in the book. And also Ian Fleming I think he did live there at one point. He had he had an estate there. Huh. And I'll mention that later. We'll get back to that later.
Let's talk about Felix Leiter.
Felix Leiter, yes, played by Jack Lord. I really like his sunglasses.
Yeah. So for people who don't really know much about Bond, Felix is kind of like the CIA equivalent of James Bond.
Yeah, and he shows up every now and again to, like, help him.
Yeah.
He's in... Of the first 5 James Bond movies, I think he's in 2 of them. 3. He's in 3 of them, because he's in this one, Goldfinger, and Thunderball, played by 3 different actors.
Of course. He's just really good at disguises.
He's yes, and then he's always like a different age too. It's weird. But Jack Lord, for whatever reason, he's usually one of the first actors I think of when I think of Felix Leiter. I think it's just because he's not quite as charismatic as Sean Connery is, but he's one of the few that comes close to being as charismatic. Like, you could see him being his own character in his own movie, but here he's just like, here, I'm gonna help James Bond for a while, Because usually they're just like they don't bring back the same actor for whatever reason. But I kind of wish
Yeah,
Jack
'cause
Ward had been in more of these. I thought he was a good Felix Leiter. But I don't know what happened there. I think he wanted a bigger part or something, and maybe that's why. But I mean, usually the same actor didn't really come. Like Jeffrey Wright and David Hedison, I think, are the only two where the same actor.
Yeah, because
came
Jeffrey
back.
was in what, three of the Daniel Craig ones?
3 of the Daniel Craig ones. David Hedison is in Live and Let Die and License to Kill. So he's the only Felix Leiter that worked with 2 different Bond actors, which is very interesting.
Huh. That's a pretty good time, like, difference of like time. It's like what, 16 years between those two?
It also means he's in Roger Moore's first Bond movie and Timothy Dalton's last Bond movie, which is very strange. And both of them are kind of based on the same book, but I'll get to that if we ever do License to Kill on the podcast.
Okay.
Oh, there's a part where they hide under the water and then stab a dude.
That's right.
You remember that? They're like using like reeds to like breathe through the water. That almost feels like something from one of the Rambo movies.
It kind of does, yeah.
Like that part made me think of the part where Rambo like covers himself in mud and then stabs a guy. But anyway.
There's a couple of just those weird sort of smaller fights, like
yeah,
when the 2 guys on the dock sort of gang up on him, and he's just like fighting the one that has a knife, and he doesn't take him seriously, and the second guy just grabs him from behind. He looks genuinely surprised, like he wasn't expecting it.
Yeah. I like the ending. Felix Leiter finds Bond and Honey. They're just on a boat floating out in the middle of nowhere. And Bond says, "What's the matter? Need some help?" And Felix says something like, "Clearly you don't need any." And then, of course, the movie ends with Christopher Plummer giving a victory speech, and he says, "The wheel will always turn."
Will always turn.
I just really want to watch Star Crash again. But anyway, okay, so but do you have anything else to say before the cons, or because I do have a few?
I think I'm ready to move into cons. I don't have a ton for cons, but I do have a couple of things.
I have a few. This one's weird because Q is technically in it
for like 20 seconds.
But he's not called Q. He's called Major Boothroyd. He's the guy that gives 007 his gun at the beginning of the movie. Like, they switch out his Beretta with a Walther PPK, which he uses for most of the movies going forward. They change it up a few times. And he's not played by Desmond Llewellyn. He's played by a different guy. So we technically don't get Q until From Russia with Love. And we don't get to see Q Branch until Goldfinger. So that's kind of interesting. And the opening credits are strange. So this is before they settled on the typical Bond opening, where you get the gun barrel, the pre-title sequence, and then you get the opening credits with a huge bombastic song playing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of prototype Bond. And what's interesting there, I think Sean Connery is not doing the gun barrel there.
Who is?
That's his stunt double, actually. They don't... Connery didn't do his own gun barrel until Thunderball, I believe, if I remember right. And there's weird inconsistent styling with the opening credits. Like it's
Yeah, it jumps around.
the colorful like dots and stuff, which they did bring back in No Time to Die's credits, which was interesting. But then it's the weird calypso thing with the dancing girls, and then
Yeah,
it's
and like I mentioned, this dance, it reminded me of the intro to Mulholland Drive, when they had everyone just dancing, like they're dancing silhouettes, pretty much.
yeah. Which I guess they do dancing silhouettes in some of the other Bond openings, but not quite like this. It's a little different.
Yeah, yeah.
They're usually naked for one.
And I think just talking about this being a prototype, there's some weird inconsistencies in Bond's character in this one. We already mentioned how he feels like a sad child having to give up his favorite toy when he's leaving behind the Beretta. But one that sticks out to me is when he and Honey are in Dr. No's lair. And he's in like a bathrobe and he just starts eating snacks that are laying around. Honey says, how can you eat at a time like this? And his response is, because I'm hungry. Just a weird response. And he says it weird too.
That's not the exact line, but yeah, that's basically.
No, his exact line is, because I'm hungry.
Is that the exact line? I don't remember.
That's the line. He says, because I'm hungry, and then he like puts the emphasis on the Ray part of hungry.
I think he says more than that, though, doesn't he?
He says more after, but he starts it with, because I'm hungry.
Let me look this up. Wait a minute. I think I found the clip.
How can you eat at a time like this?
Because I'm hungry.
Because I'm hungry. Okay, he does say that. Yeah, that is all. That almost sounds like Arnold, actually. But anyway. There's also some sloppy editing during parts of this. Like when Bond is examining the house of that woman that got shot, there's like a jump cut that's super obvious, and you're just like, okay, you know.
I also spotted one where he was like talking to someone. He kind of put their arm around her wrist, and then it cuts, and suddenly he's just not anymore.
And it's weird because it like cuts in the same spot too. It's a little strange. There's also not as much action in this one as there are in some of the later Bond movies. Like even From Russia with Love has more action in this, I noticed. And you could tell it. You can kind of tell it's a lower budget movie than the others.
Yeah.
Like I was watching like You Only Live Twice earlier today, and honestly, that one I find more fun to watch than this one. Just like the set design in that one is just so absurd and like just crazy. It's a little bit more colorful than this one. And Bond, if you want James Bond to have gadgets, this one...
There's no gadgets in this one.
None. Although he doesn't really have any in the books, if I remember right. Not that many, at least.
It is weird to see him missing, especially since they become just so much of a staple in these movies. Sometimes they get a little ridiculous, but
that's kind of the fun of them when they're just like... It's so
when he's
ridiculous.
driving an invisible car around.
Oh, jeez. His like exploding pen from GoldenEye is a memorable one, you know. Or some of the ones in Goldfinger, like his car with all the weird shit in it.
Yeah.
It is kind of fun though watching the earlier ones because there wasn't just because they hadn't quite established the formula yet, so it's kind of like, interesting seeing like, okay, they're trying different things, but you kind of miss some of the trademarks that came later.
And they don't have, because like a lot of them, I think most of them, start with a pretty exciting opening to like get you in. Like it starts off on an action scene. Like The first one that comes to mind for me is usually the one at the beginning of Spectre when he's in Mexico during the Day of the Dead parade.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good
Uh,
action scene in a very
yeah.
mediocre movie.
Yeah, no, it's a great way to start and just to kind of blow a movie.
Actually, now that I think about it, I think the opening of that movie is probably the best part of it.
100%. It's a fantastic
Because the rest
opening.
of it's really not. That's like really the only memorable action scene that I can think of from that one. But like usually I'm thinking of, Goldfinger's got a good opening, shocking, positively shocking. Or Octopussy has a pretty good opening with the jet going through the garage and stuff like that.
That one almost feels like an Indiana Jones scene, the one on Octopussy.
It actually kind of does, yeah. That movie kind of feels like Indiana Jones, because
Kind of just Indiana Jones hopped up on sugar.
we mentioned during Temple of Doom that kind of has, they're both set in India, and there's
yeah.
the dinner scene in that movie, for example. There's a part of me that wonders if Spielberg got inspiration from that, but yeah.
Well, even the intro when they're in Club Obi-Wan in Temple of Doom, that really feels like a Bond scene.
He's wearing the same tuxedo that Bond is wearing in Goldfinger's opening, so yeah. But you kind of miss having the big, like, opening action scene in one of these movies. You don't really get one. From Russia with Love has a pre-title scene, but it's not like that. I don't know if you remember what that one was, but that's the one where...
I don't. I've only seen that one once.
That's the one where Bond is like... It's like a Spectre training exercise.
Huh.
Where Red Grant kills, like, a guy that looks like James Bond as, like, a training exercise. So it's very different from what you usually get in the opening. He just chokes him to death, basically. It's not until Goldfinger when you get, like, the proper pre-title sequence with, like, the big action set piece, Anyway. We're getting off topic. Sheesh. And I know that this movie was made in the 60s, but there's characters in this that are supposed to be Asian, and the makeup is okay. It's not only just like, okay, yeah, obviously it's not very politically correct, which, okay, fine, whatever, but it's just not very good makeup. It doesn't look convincing.
No, it really doesn't. It's hard to even describe that. It makes them all look very much like a stereotype.
They just tried adding eyebrows to him to make him look Chinese, and it just doesn't. It looks awful. I didn't even realize for the longest time that Dr. No was supposed to be part Chinese.
Yeah, until he gives the Dr. Evil speech.
Because it just doesn't even, like... It's like they barely tried with the makeup, like... Although, as a result, though, it's like, thankfully, it's not as racist. It's like Mickey Rooney and Breakfast at Tiffany's or something like that, but it's still just like, what? But whatever. It's kind of one of those things where it's just so ridiculous that you can't really take it seriously, and you're just like, okay, we'll move on from here.
Yeah.
Speaking of racism, though, Bond at one point, I don't know if you remember this, he tells Quirrell to fetch his shoes.
Oh.
I didn't notice that until I got older, but wow, that would not fly today.
Yeah, that's a yikes.
1962 is when this came out. And the books are, like, they're even worse than that. Which I might talk about that a bit later. When we get to some of the other movies. I do like Dr. No as a villain, but I wish he had more screen time. And I'll admit, his villain plot isn't the most interesting. it's just like, okay, disrupt the missile launch, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I mentioned, he's portrayed as this very intelligent, sort of upright character that just for whatever reason has these really harebrained ideas at points. Like starting to claim there's a dragon or trying to kill James Bond using a spider.
Yeah, he's a weird one for sure. But I mean, there have been way weirder Bond plots than that. I mean,
Yeah.
Man with a Golden Gun. Because it's like, oh, I'm gonna kill James Bond, but also I want like a laser beam that runs on solar power. Or like Diamonds Are Forever. I kind of wish we were talking about one of the crazier ones, just because some of the. Well, the next one actually has a pretty crazy villain plot. Now that I think about it, but
good.
We'll have to talk about that one later. Did you have anything else to add with?
No, I think that's about all that I had.
Okay, so overall thoughts. And again, it's a prototype Bond.
Yep.
It is fun to watch, and it has a lot of memorable parts, especially in the last third of it. Like the last third, that's like classic 007 stuff right there.
Yeah.
You know? Connery's very good. You know, it's cool seeing his first time as the famous character. It's not the best though. I mean, it's no From Russia with Love or Goldfinger. You know, I mean, those are kind of like those are the ones I hold up as like the high standards as far as like classic James Bond, at least. Especially Goldfinger. But Dr. No was the first, so it deserves a lot of credit for offering a few of the benchmarks of the series. I think it really, I just think it suffers when you look at it compared to like some of the other films of the series. Because it's some of the other ones, they just get so weird and goofy in some ways, or like, you know, just like, so those ones would have a little bit more rewatch value to them. Like this one's probably my least favorite of the 3 Terence Young directed Bond movies, for instance. Like I prefer Thunderball, and I definitely prefer From Russia with Love. I love that movie. But it's good, you know. It's a good Bond movie. It's kind of interesting, you know, just like, hey, here's where it all started.
Yeah, and like you said, it's very much a lower budget prototype for the movies that would come after it. So it is also just sort of interesting to watch the movie through that lens. Just like, okay, so you can see, like, you know, the Bond girl archetype get laid out. You can see sort of how these things are paced, how Bond deals with all these different henchmen that are coming after him, and then the confrontation with the big bad that leads to some sort of disastrous death for the main villain.
Oh, that's another thing. That's another thing this movie was missing. The weird henchmen with, like, you know, the like, razor blade.
There are henchmen, but they're not, like, strange, like some of the later ones.
You know, like, because usually when I think of the henchmen, I'm thinking of, like, Jaws or Odd Job, you know?
Yeah. Baron Samedi?
Yeah. From Live and Let Die,
yeah.
Which we'll get to that one eventually. You haven't watched that one yet, have you?
No, I haven't.
That is going to be an interesting one to talk about. Okay. I think I gained more appreciation for this one after, like, reading the Fleming books, because this one feels more like the Fleming books than some of the other movies of the series. So it's kind of like the movies, they were trying to be close to the books a little bit more, but then they were also trying to do their own thing. And it wasn't until Goldfinger when they were like, okay, here's the Bond formula, let's just run with that from now on. You know? Because most of the Bond movies nowadays, like, or after, you know, the Connery ones, they were trying to be like Goldfinger rather than From Russia with Love or Dr. No, you know?
Yeah.
with like all the weird gadgets and stuff, and the villain with the weird plot or gimmick. But anyway, did you have anything else to add about this one? Sorry.
I think that was it. Again, it's just a good one to revisit every now and again, and it does help. It does give quite a bit of just an interesting look at how the series started.
I'm surprised you've seen this one more than From Russia with Love, actually. But anyway, I kind of want to watch Austin Powers now. Watching this one and then watching You Only Live Twice earlier today. I kept thinking of the first Austin Powers movie, and I'm like, because I do really enjoy that first Austin Powers movie. But no, our next podcast it's not Austin Powers. It's not From Russia with Love either. We're going in a weird order. Because we're doing the first movie of each Bond actor. So next time, this one has an interesting distinction. It's the first and last James Bond film.
Yep.
Of Mr. Big Fry himself, George Lazenby. Or Lazenby. I'm actually not.
Isn't it? Is it Lazenby?
I usually pronounce it Lazenby, but,
Yeah.
Anyway. The only Australian Bond.
Huh.
Also the only one that hadn't appeared in a movie before his appearance as Bond, so...
Really? That was his first movie?
All he had done at that point was some chocolate commercials for Big Fry's Turkish Delight. And he was like a model. He was like a male model, but anyway. So yeah, that will be... We're going to learn, why did he only do one movie? Next time. And you haven't seen this one. I just remembered. You haven't seen this one yet.
No.
So you don't know...
So this will be my first time.
You don't know much of anything about George Lazenby, aside from he's only in one movie.
Yeah. And he's also in that weird video game Fox Hunt.
I forgot about that. You sent me a clip of that. There's like a clip from that with Rob Lowe.
Yes.
What the hell? There was like... I don't remember what was happening, but there was like an anvil and Rob Lowe. And I just was like, what is happening here?
I forgot about the anvil.
And Rob Lowe is in one of the Austin Powers movies, I just remembered. He's in The Spy Who Shagged Me.
Really?
Because he plays the younger version of number 2. Is the eye patch. But anyway. Okay, so... Yeah, so unfortunately we won't be seeing Sean Connery again for quite a while, but hey, we'll be doing George Lazenby, and then at some point we'll get around to Roger Moore and some of the other Bond actors and their first attempt. We're gonna see who had the best debut as James Bond.
It should be a pretty interesting experiment.
Okay. Maybe at some point. Yeah. Maybe at some point we'll do like the last movie they did.
Yeah. See who had the hardest fall from grace.
I think it's pretty obvious who it was, actually. But anyway. Alright, so roll the...
Andy Griffith.
I was trying to think of a Bond quote to end on, but I'm not sure which one.
And from a quote from the Casino Royale parody movie.
Oh, jeez. I'm trying to remember a quote from that. I haven't seen it in a while. Oh, wait, I just remembered. Who does number 2 work for? There we go. From the better James Bond parody. Okay. See ya later. Anyway.
Roll the clip.
Good night, you stupid idiot. Good night, you miserable slob.